In this third lecture for Chapter 14 on epidemiology, we're going to pick up with the stages of infectious disease, or what's termed the disease process. This graph here depicts what's happening with the number of organisms during the different periods of the illness. The number of organisms is tracked on the y-axis and the time across the x-axis. The first stage of infection is the incubation period, considered COVID-19. After the person gets exposed and the virus starts to multiply, they have no signs or symptoms to indicate anything is happening. Unless they get a test to check for virus, they would not know. For some people, that incubation period is never going to move to the other stages, although they might still be shedding infectious agent. The incubation period is, for most diseases, the period of time after you're infected, but before you feel any signs or symptoms. You'll notice on the graph that the number of organisms is going up ever so slightly. Next comes the prodromal period. This stage is when you get those vague, general symptoms, like maybe a little headache, perhaps a bit nauseous or dizzy, the feeling of kind of blah. These aren't intense feelings, but at this time you may sense maybe I'm coming down with something. You just don't quite feel right. See that the organisms are multiplying? Next, you enter into the period of illness where you're experiencing the signs and symptoms of that particular infection. The organisms are reaching their peak numbers now. At this point, hopefully, your immune system is kicking in and catching up with the infectious agent. Your immune system, if functioning, will start bringing that infection under control. So next, you're going to experience a decline in signs and symptoms as the organism numbers are being brought down by your immune system. Finally, you enter into that period of convalescence. Ultimately, infection resolves and there are no remaining signs or symptoms, and the numbers of organisms are going to decline until they're gone. For infectious organisms, it's important to transmit to a new host so they can continue to exist. To get those pathogens out of the host, with the potential to infect a new one, there are portals of exit. Many of the portals of exit are the same as the portals of entry. In this figure, you'll recognize that a lot of those same portals that you saw as portals of entry, the entry points are the same as the exit points. Something to keep in mind is that basically any kind of secretion or fluid is going to be a potential spot for where infectious agents can be transmitted. This table from your book is broken up over several slides, but it's worth going back and taking a look at the chapter in the chapter is because the definition of each of the modes of transmission. Note that they're in three broad categories: contact, vehicle, and vector. Contact transmission means physical contact, like handshakes or kissing or sexual relations. Indirect contact includes situations like when somebody touches something and then you touch that and then infect yourself. For example, sharing drinking glasses or toothbrushes or cell phone or something like that. A fomite is an inanimate object capable of transmitting the infectious agent. If your roommate picks up your cell phone and uses it, after sniffing all over it, you perhaps don't realize that happened and you pick it up and use it and then acquire the cold virus yourself. The telephone is the fomite that transmitted the infection. Droplet transmission is sneezing or coughing. That's how COVID-19 is usually transmitted. And droplet transmission is considered contact transmission. You have to be in close proximity for it to occur. Notice that the designation is that you're within a meter. You're talking about, for the most part, close proximity so that the small respiratory droplets that are exhaled by one individual are inhaled by another. Vehicle transmission includes airborne transmission. How's that different from droplet transmission? Well, now we're talking about something that can be transmitted by the air at a much further distance than a meter. An airborne transmission is more concerning because a sick individual can be quite some distance away and you still might acquire the infection from them. Measles is airborne, An infected person at Disneyland infected quite a number of other individuals, causing a multi-state epidemic, and those folks at Disney did not need to be very close to the infected individual to acquire the infection. Now, if the infected people had all been vaccinated, the numbers of infections would have been lower, but that's a discussion for another time. Waterborne and foodborne transmission is self-explanatory. Water or food can be the source of the infection. Finally, we have the vector transmissions, which includes mechanical or biological. When we observed a flea in the lab, we are examining a biological vector. A flea or a louse or a mite, mosquito, tick, any of those biting bugs might be a biological vector. They pick up the infectious organism, and that organism spends part of its life with that vector and then is transmitted to a new host by the vector. Mechanical transmission is just moving an infectious agent from one place to the other. Imagine something like a fly landing on fecal material and then landing on your food and bringing infectious organism with it. That type of transmission is mechanical. It's worth spending some time with this table from your book and really understanding the types of transmission. This slide contains some images from your book showing possible transmission scenarios. You can see the respiratory droplets captured in a sneeze. Or here you can see food being a vehicle of transmission. You can imagine flies or something else in a very unhygienic type of butchering process going on in here. No refrigeration means that the pathogens have the opportunity to multiply once introduced. Here's yet another table from your book. 14.12 has a lot of terminology to learn. This entire chapter has a lot of terminology that you want to make sure you understand before we move further into the semester. From this table, it is especially important to know the difference between acute disease and chronic disease. Acute disease runs its course very quickly, so a cold tends to be acute. Something like hepatitis B would last a long time. Chronic disease usually has more mild symptoms, at least initially, and it develops and builds slowly, perhaps until a crisis event brings it into sharp attention. Subacute disease displays signs and symptoms somewhere between acute and chronic. Latent disease goes quiescent and then might reappear. The herpes virus infections do this, as mentioned in the virus chapter. These infections reappear after longish periods of no symptoms. The disease is latent and then it reappears. Communicable means that you can transmit the infection. Infected individuals are contagious. Contagious means that you're capable of spreading the infection at this time. Non-communicable, the disease can't be spread from person to person. Not contagious, you cannot spread it. Local infection is a little different than focal infection down below. Local infection is confined to a region. You might have a little pimple or a canker sore, something that's confined to a specific area, usually not a large area. Whereas focal means that you have a site of infection that is serving as a source of infection for other sites. For example, if you have a tooth infection and then those organisms get into your bloodstream and then travel and infect your heart valve, the tooth infection is the focal infection. Systemic infection is widespread. It involves multiple organs. Often it's being spread by your blood or your lymph. The primary infection is the initial infection. Sometimes that leads to a secondary infection. Secondary infections follow the primary infection. Sometimes what happens is you're trying to treat the primary infection, but you screw up the normal flora of the patient with the antimicrobial used to treat the primary infection. Then they end up with a secondary infection. This happens with yeast infections as described earlier. We want to understand the terminology. Understand that sometimes we talk about organisms by taxonomic groups. We might be talking about gram-negative enteric organisms versus some gram-positive organisms. That would be a taxonomic type of organization discussion. However, you could focus on the system that they're infecting. Perhaps we talk about the different respiratory infections. That would be a body system approach to infectious agents. That's how we will actually approach the disease part of the book, because that's how the health science students tend to do it. A lot of people in this class are going on to health science-oriented programs, so we're going to discuss the organisms through a body system organization. There are other ways to approach the topic, however. You might break infections up as diseases that for longevity or severity or how they're spread or their effect on populations. It depends what is most important to the discussion. We will be spending our time on dividing up body systems and their infections. When epidemiologists are speaking, they tend to talk about disease in terms of incidence and prevalence. I think if you had examined some of the numerous reports out about COVID-19, you will recognize this fact. Incidence is the number of new cases of disease during a period of time, whereas prevalence is the total cases of disease during that time. For COVID-19, there have been weekly reports of the number of new cases in a city, a county, or a state. That's incidence. When the report discusses the total cases, like since March of last year, that is prevalence. New cases are when they'll say, oh, today there were 51 new cases in Orange County. That's incidence. Occurrence is also evaluated, like how frequent. The number per 100,000 people is a typical value. Or you might want to know the geographic distribution. We don't have malaria in California. Where is it? That's a question for geographic distribution. The MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, is a report that you can find on government website. It's a pretty academic report that not many people outside professional scientific and medical circles paid attention to, even though it's available on the CDC website. It got quite a bit of attention during the Trump administration because they took issue with the reports and tried to edit them. It created quite a controversy at the time. The scientific community did not at all appreciate the politicization of the reports. It quieted down after the administration change and the report slid back into the shadows. Only people interested in emerging diseases pay it close attention, but it's probably worth checking out just to be a bit familiar with it. The report has important information about new infections and other types of diseases in the United States. It comes out every week, and the information is available to anyone that wants to read it. Let's take a look at a few graphs that demonstrate how epidemiologists report infectious diseases. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, these types of graphs have been ever present in different news reports. First, there's a type of graph where the report is on the total number of cases in a particular state during a period of time. Or here you look at the infection as a year progresses. Or you might be looking here at a particular type of disease as a snapshot of who is getting the infected. If you look, you can see that this is some sort of early childhood disease because you don't see it in older adults. As you can see, data can be reported in a lot of different ways. It's important to know what needs to be communicated so the appropriate type of presentation can be made. Here's a few more terms for the chapter. A pandemic is a worldwide epidemic. Epidemic is an unusual cluster of cases in a particular region. For an epidemic, we see more disease than what was expected. Pandemic is happening across multiple continents. Sporadic disease is one that pops up now and again, but we really don't see it very often. Sporadic doesn't really happen on a regular basis, whereas endemic is happening at a certain regular and predictable rate in a population. If we look at this graph right here, we can notice that we're looking at two different diseases. We have this cycle of infection that happens, this wave of infection that happens on a yearly basis, and it kind of waxes and it wanes over time. You can see that in this purple line is the actual number of cases in a specific time, and that line is following the expected pattern. Whereas if you look at disease number 2, it's also waxing and waning, but all of a sudden you see a spike. This number is far above the expected value. Those are a cluster of cases that you really don't expect to see. Well, that's an epidemic. This is some of the notifiable diseases. Notifiable means that the health department needs to hear about these diseases when they're discovered, and they report them to the CDC, the federal government. We keep track of some of these diseases due to their significance to public health. COVID-19 is currently a notifiable disease. It's being tracked and probably will be for quite a long time. I think I'll end here. I'll pick up our last lecture for Chapter 14 with the forms of epidemiology in Part 4.